The house fell into silence the moment Nora opened the door, and standing there was the impossible. Two women identical in face and form staring back at each other. One was her daughter-in-law, the woman who had lived under her roof for years. The other was a stranger, trembling eyes wide with guilt. Little Jamie's voice broke the stillness as he clutched Nora's hand and whispered, "Grandma, why are there two mums?" In that instant, Nora's world shattered. What had been whispers of doubt and small inconsistencies exploded into a terrifying truth her family had been living with, a secret so deep it threatened to destroy everything she held dear. What happened next would tear open lies, test the limits of love, and reveal the kind of courage it takes to protect the people you love most. The strangest stories never announce themselves. They creep into ordinary mornings and split your life into before and after. For Nora Whitaker, 65, and widowed in Aurora, Colorado that morning, began with dishes clattering in the sink and the hum of her daughter-in-law's voice floating down the stairs. By evening, she would question everything she thought she knew about her family. Her eldest son, Daniel Mercer, had already left for his architecture firm, his briefcase swinging as he headed to his car before sunrise. Nora's 7-year-old grandson, Jamie, had boarded the school bus, leaving behind the scent of peanut butter sandwiches. And upstairs, Nora had heard Marina Vale, her daughter-in-law, calling gently, "Mom, I'll be quick, just taking a shower." Nora had smiled and nodded. A quiet morning just like any other. Then the phone rang. She dried her hands and lifted the receiver. "Mom." It was Luke, her younger son, the boy who had once built paper airplanes in her kitchen and now flew real ones as a co-pilot. His voice carried warmth at first, but then it cracked into a tremor. "Mom, something's wrong. I think I just saw Marina." Nora frowned. "Of course you did. She's here upstairs. I can hear the shower running." "No, Mom." Luke whispered, "I'm standing on a jet bridge in Denver. Marina just boarded my flight. She's on her way to Paris. I'm staring at her passport right now." Nora's smile froze. "That's impossible," she said too quickly. She almost laughed because the thought was ridiculous. She had literally spoken to Marina minutes ago. But Luke didn't laugh. His silence on the other end of the line pressed into her chest like a stone. When he finally spoke again, his words carried a weight that made Nora's knees weaken. "I saw her with my own eyes. Mom, she's in first class sitting beside some rich guy. They looked close, too close." Nora gripped the phone, her mind spiraling. She wanted to shout at Luke that he was mistaken, that it had to be some bizarre mix-up. Yet just then, the sound of running water upstairs stopped. Footsteps tapped down the hall. A familiar voice called out from the landing, "Mom, who's on the phone?" Her heart hammered. "Just a friend." Nora stammered, forcing her voice to stay calm, but her hands were trembling so violently she had to set the receiver down before she dropped it. Marina appeared at the top of the staircase, damp hair clinging to her cheeks, smiling as if nothing in the world was amiss. "I'll head to the market later," she said casually before retreating back upstairs. Nora sat frozen, Luke's words echoing in her ears. "She's sitting right in front of me on this plane." For the rest of that day, nothing felt real. Marina came downstairs in a pale blue dress, her wicker basket on her arm, and offered with her usual sweetness, tomatoes, Mom fresh fish for dinner. Nora forced a nod, her throat too dry to speak. She watched her daughter-in-law disappear through the garden gate, and an icy thought cut through her denial. If Luke wasn't lying, and he never lied, then who exactly was standing in her kitchen? Memories she had never questioned began to unravel in her mind. There had been days Marina's handwriting looked neat, steady right-handed. Other days scrawled and awkward left-handed. Days she was affectionate, hugging Jamie, singing him to sleep. And other days, cold, distant, snapping over trifles. Nora had dismissed it all as mood swings, as exhaustion. But now it felt like evidence. Her neighbour, Diane Porter, stopped by with a plate the next afternoon. "Your Marina is such a sweetheart," Diane said, lowering her voice with a hint of curiosity. "But yesterday she gave me this with her left hand. I thought you told me she was right-handed." Nora smiled thinly, brushing it off, but Diane's words stabbed like a needle. That evening, little Jamie bounded home from school. "Grandma, look." He showed her his notebook proudly. 2 pages side by side, one filled with perfect penmanship, the next messy and crooked. "Mum helped me yesterday with her right hand," he chirped, "but today she used her left." "Isn't that weird?" Nora hugged him, forcing a smile, but her chest ached. She tucked him in that night, and as he whispered sleepily, "Sometimes my mum hugs me really tight, but sometimes she doesn't even look at me." Her heart broke a little more. The innocence in his voice was unbearable. By the 3rd day, the unease had grown into something darker suspicion that clawed at Nora's sanity. Marina had returned from the market carrying her basket in her left hand instead of her right. Her smile seemed rehearsed. That night at dinner, she laughed politely with Dan, reminded him about Jamie's upcoming parent-teacher conference, but Nora couldn't hear her words. She heard only Luke's voice repeating, "She's sitting in first class next to a man." Nora started keeping notes. In the quiet of her room, she pulled out an old notebook and wrote in shaky script 3:00 p.m. Marina left for market. 6:00 p.m. returned in blue blouse not white, mood distant. The next entry yesterday. Sweet sang Jamie to sleep. Today cold refused to help with homework. With each line, the weight of dread grew heavier. What terrified Nora most wasn't that her daughter-in-law was lying. It was the possibility that there were 2 Marinas, one who tucked her grandson into bed with a lullaby, and another who turned her back without remorse. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to uncover a secret that would tear open the very foundation of her family. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. Do you think Nora should have trusted her instincts earlier or kept brushing off the strange details? If you were in her place, would you stay silent to keep the peace or start digging to find the truth? And tell me, do you believe Luke really saw Marina on that flight, or could it still be some wild coincidence? The notebook on Nora Whittaker's lap was beginning to look like the diary of a madwoman, pages full of observations that should never have existed in the first place. A right hand one day, a left the next. A blouse that changed colour within hours. A smile that felt genuine on Monday and hollow by Tuesday. The small cracks had widened into gaping fractures, and Nora could no longer convince herself she was imagining things. It all came to a breaking point one late afternoon. Marina Vale announced in her usual sweet tone, "Mom, I'm going to the market for a bit," and left with her wicker basket swinging from her arm. But something in the tilt of her voice, the hurried way she closed the gate, made Nora's instincts flare. She hesitated only for a second before pulling on her shawl and stepping into the fading sunlight. She followed from a distance, her heart pounding with every step. Marina turned onto the familiar cobblestone road that led to the Aurora Farmers Market. But halfway there, she did something strange. She didn't turn right toward the stalls. Instead, she slipped left into a narrow alley Nora had never seen her enter before. Nora pressed herself against the brick wall of a mechanic's shop, the smell of grease sharp in the air. Her pulse roared in her ears as she watched Marina, no, the woman who looked like Marina, knock on the door of a decaying house with peeling paint. The door opened and she stepped inside. Nora wanted to march over demand answers, but her legs felt like stone. Fear anchored her in place. After what felt like hours, she turned back toward home, her thoughts a tangled storm. When she opened her front gate, Nora nearly screamed. There in the kitchen window stood Marina, hair tied back neatly, wearing a crisp white blouse. She looked up casually and waved. "You're back already, Mum," she called through the glass. Nora's blood ran cold. How could the same woman she had followed into that alley now be chopping vegetables in her kitchen? Her knees buckled as she climbed the stairs to her room. For the first time in her life, Nora felt like she was living with a stranger. That night, Jamie clambered onto her lap, tears welling in his innocent eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, "yesterday my mum hugged me tight and sang me that song you used to sing. But today, she yelled at me because I dropped a pencil. I want the mum from yesterday." Nora held him close, her tears soaking his hair. The contradictions were no longer subtle, they were cruel, scarring the child who should have known nothing but love. Nora knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, she marched back to the alley. With trembling hands, she carried a family photo, Marina's radiant smile beside Dan and Jamie. She showed it to a fruit seller outside the decrepit house. "Have you seen this woman?" Nora asked. The woman nodded instantly. "Yes. She goes in and out of number 14 often." Nora's stomach flipped. She crossed the narrow lane, her legs shaking with every step. She knocked on the rotting door. It creaked open, and Nora's breath vanished. Standing before her was a woman identical to Marina. Same dark hair, same delicate features, same slender frame. Only her eyes were different, haunted, guilt-ridden, and brimming with fear. She clutched a rag in her hand and whispered, "I'm sorry." Before Nora could respond, another voice came from inside, firm but gentle. "Maya, you can't hide anymore." A young woman stepped out of the shadows, introducing herself as Riley Kim, the roommate. "Please, Mrs. Whitaker, come in. It's time you knew the truth." The small house smelled faintly of disinfectant. An elderly man coughed weakly from a cot in the corner. Nora sat on a rickety chair, her heart pounding, as the woman before her lowered her eyes. "My name isn't Marina," she said quietly. "It's Maya Reed. Marina pays me to pretend to be her. She said it was just a few hours at a time, just small things, cooking, going to the market, looking after Jamie. I never asked why. I just needed the money for my parents' medicine." Nora's hands trembled so violently she had to grip the chair to steady herself. The puzzle pieces locked into place, the shifting moods, the inconsistent handwriting, the sudden coldness. She wasn't imagining anything. There had been 2 women in her home all along. "Why would she do this?" Nora whispered, her throat tight. Maya shook her head, tears streaming. "I don't know. Sometimes she'd vanish for hours, leaving me to fill in. Other times she'd tell me to stay away for days. Once I saw her at a cafe with a wealthy man. His name was Grant Ellison. They spoke like lovers. I realized too late she was using me to cover her tracks." Nora's chest heaved, fury and despair tangling inside her. Her son's wife, her beloved daughter-in-law, had orchestrated this deception, exploiting her own twin-like double. And poor Jamie had been caught in the middle, left to wonder why his mother loved him one day and scorned him the next. But then Riley placed a steadying hand on Nora's arm. "Mrs. Whitaker, Maya isn't the villain here. She's a victim too. She never wanted this." Marina dangled money in front of her, knowing she had sick parents to care for. Nora looked around the shabby home, at the man coughing under a thin blanket, at Maya's trembling hands. Compassion stabbed through her fury. Maya was no mastermind, she was a pawn. But Marina had turned betrayal into an art form. That night back at her house, Nora pulled out her notebook again. Her handwriting was jagged with rage as she wrote, "There are 2 of them, Marina and Maya. She is living a double life, and my family is in the middle of it." Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger. She had once believed her home was safe, her family whole. Now it felt like a stage where someone else had been pulling the strings all along. Nora blew out the lamp, her chest heaving. Tomorrow she decided she would no longer sit quietly. Tomorrow she would drag the truth into the light, no matter how much it hurt. "Do you think Marina is using Maya just to cover an affair, or do you sense something even darker? If you discovered your daughter-in-law had a secret double, would you confront her immediately or keep investigating? And here's the toughest one. Do you think Dan is prepared for the truth, or will it destroy him?" The next evening, Nora Whitaker prepared her house for a dinner unlike any other. She laid out her finest white tablecloth lit candles she hadn't touched in years and cooked the meals her family loved most. It wasn't a celebration, it was the night the truth would no longer hide in shadows. Her eldest son Daniel came home weary from a long day his tie loosened. He looked at the table in surprise. "What's all this for, Mum?" Nora forced a gentle smile. "A family dinner. We need it." Marina Vale walked in. Moments later, wearing her soft blue dress and carrying herself with the composure that once charmed the whole neighborhood. She kissed Jamie on the head, smiled at Dan, and sat down as though nothing was amiss. But Nora could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted nervously toward her mother-in-law. Then the doorbell rang. Daniel looked puzzled as Nora rose. When she returned, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Luke Mercer, still in his pilot's jacket, and beside him, Maya Reed. The room froze. Daniel's fork clattered onto his plate. Jamie looked between the two women, his innocent eyes wide. Grandma. Why are there two mums? Nora's chest tightened, but she steadied her voice. "Sit down, Marina. Tonight everything comes out." Marina's face went pale. "What is this, some sick trick?" she spat, though her voice cracked. Luke dropped a set of papers onto the table, her electronic passport stamped with entry and exit records showing Paris. His voice was like steel. "You can't be in France and here at the same time, Marina. You've been lying to all of us." Daniel's eyes burned into his wife. "Tell me this isn't true." But before Marina could speak, Jamie piped up again, his voice trembling. "It is true, Daddy. Some days Mummy hugs me and sings me songs, and other days she doesn't even look at me. I don't like the mean mommy." Those words cut deeper than any evidence. Marina flinched, but her silence was louder than any denial. Nora turned to Maya. "Tell them what you told me." Maya's hands shook as she clutched the edge of the table, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marina paid me to pretend to be her, to take her place when she wanted to disappear. I only agreed because my adoptive parents are sick and I needed the money. I never wanted to deceive anyone. I'm so sorry." Daniel's world collapsed in that moment. He had given Marina his love, his trust, his home, and she had traded it for lies and another man's arms. His voice trembled low and hoarse. "Why, Marina? Why did you do this?" Marina's mask finally cracked. Fury flashed in her eyes as she stood. "Because I was tired of this life, tired of being trapped in this house with a husband who worked himself into the ground and a child who drained me. With Grant, I had luxury freedom. You'll never understand." Her words were daggers. Daniel's face crumpled. Jamie burst into tears and buried his face in Nora's arms. Luke's fists clenched at his sides. Without another word, Marina grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the candles flickered out. The silence she left behind was heavier than any scream. In the weeks that followed, the papers were signed. Marina walked away without asking for custody of her son, leaving Daniel hollow and Jamie heartbroken. The house that once held warmth now echoed with absence. But sometimes healing enters quietly, like dawn creeping over the horizon. Maya began visiting often, first to check on Jamie, then to help with meals, and finally just to be there. She never tried to take Marina's place, she simply showed up with honesty and patience. When Jamie asked why she looked like his mum, Nora explained gently, "Because she's family too, sweetheart. Life is full of surprises." One afternoon, Jamie tugged at Maya's hand. "Will you sing me that lullaby? Grandma used to sing the one Mummy sang once too." His voice trembled with hope. Maya hesitated, then softly began. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was warm, filled with sincerity. Jamie's tears dried, and for the first time in weeks he fell asleep with a smile. Daniel noticed. He saw how Maya bent down to help Jamie with homework, how she laughed at his silly jokes, how she carried herself with quiet strength. She wasn't trying to replace anyone, she was simply herself. And that was enough. Months passed, and what had once been a house of betrayal slowly became a home of healing. One evening, Daniel stood in the living room holding a small velvet box. His hands trembled, but his eyes were clear. He turned to Maya, who looked at him in confusion. "You came into our lives when everything was broken," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You brought light when we were drowning in shadows." Maya: "I don't want Jamie to grow up in pain. I don't want to live in it either. Will you be part of our family? Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Maya's cheeks. She looked at Nora, who gave her a nod filled with warmth and pride. Maya whispered, "Yes, yes, I will." Jamie threw his arms around her waist, his little voice bursting with joy. "Does this mean you're really my mum now?" Maya bent down, hugging him tight. "If you'll have me, Jamie." The boys' laughter rang through the house, pure and unbroken. For the first time since Marina's departure, it felt like home again. The wedding was small but overflowing with love. In the backyard, under strings of soft lights, Daniel stood beside Maya, his son grinning proudly as best man in a tiny suit. Luke returned from his flight smiling brighter than he had in months. And Nora sat in the front row, tears streaming down her cheeks, not of grief, but of gratitude. She thought of her late husband, Peter, and the promise he had once whispered, "The truth will set us free." Nora. He had been right. Truth had torn them apart, but it had also pieced them back together in a way that was stronger, more genuine. That night, as the music played and Jamie danced barefoot in the grass, Nora leaned back in her chair and let the tears fall. Not every story ends with betrayal. Some end with second chances. Some end with love finding its way through the wreckage. Thanks for watching. Sorry for the interruption, but we hope you will help us improve our content in the future. What do you think of this ending? Was it the justice the family deserved? If this story touched your heart, comment the number 100 below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to share this story so others can feel the same hope and humanity.